Welcome. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing the I Tatti Renaissance Library, and it's part of a set of classical libraries by Harvard University Press that includes the Dumbarton Oaks Medieval Library, the Morty Classical Library of India, and the famous Loeb Classical Library, with the red being Latin and the green being Greek. And they're all facing page translations, bilingual. So you have Latin on your left, or whatever the original language is, on the left. And then you have English on your right. And you have each paragraph generally numbered. And so that's how you keep track of where you are. So this series has as its founding editor James Hankins, who's professor of history at Harvard. And he wrote a famous book called Virtue Politics, Soulcraft, and Statecraft in Renaissance Italy. And so Machiavelli would be a part of that. But there were also there was a whole context around him. And it's a very interesting book and sort of new theory on things. So in some ways, that's a more famous part of his oeuvre than this is, at least in my opinion. This is the first book in the series. This is by Virginia Brown, and she happens to be James Hankins' wife. And this is one of the more, I think this is either the most popular or one of the most popular. It's basically an encyclopedic work by Boccaccio, who's a famous and important Renaissance thinker, and who liked to put together these sort of encyclopedic works. And so James Hankins put together, this is the first volume, and then he followed it up with several volumes on Platonic theology. So kind of this idea of combining Platonism and Neoplatonism with Christianity. And basically in the Renaissance, or even just to go back a second, you have this medieval library, you have these medieval works. Beowulf is kind of an exception to the rule, but you have a lot of Christian thinkers, and Dumbarton Oaks in particular takes on a lot of those more Christian works. They're mostly excluded from the Loeb series. And by the way, I should mention, if you haven't seen my other videos, I have a whole playlist on these bilingual classical libraries. And I'm doing the Harvard University Press libraries, but I'm also doing all the major bilingual classical libraries of different languages. So you have here Arabic, Chinese. This is by Oxford University Press. So all the major languages that have these kind of books, I'm doing all of it, and there's really nothing like this out there anywhere online. And even sort of the predecessor to the Morty Classical Library of India, that Clay Sanskrit Library. So you have a lot of Christian texts going all the way from the earliest Christian works all the way up to scholasticism in the 13, 14, 1500s. And then that's where you start getting into the Renaissance, and especially the Renaissance in Italy. So the I Tatti, what that refers to is an estate near Florence that this guy donated to Harvard University. He bequeathed it. And so he donated this estate, and he wanted it to become a center of study. And so that's what Harvard did with it. And so this series of books is named after that center. They have been having some financial difficulties, so it's not clear how much longer this series is going to go. It doesn't seem to be in the same financial stability as the other three in the series, which is unfortunate. The logo, by the way, it's got the I'm actually not sure exactly what that insect is. Maybe somebody in the comments knows what that is, but the double B there stands for Bernard Berenson. So he's the one who bequeathed this estate to Harvard. So this series was started in 2001. It's still going as of 2024. And the focus is on Neo-Latin literature. And what happened with Latin literature and Latin in general is this is the period when you start seeing Shakespeare, Cervantes, and other authors who are writing in the vernacular. So they're writing in Italian, they're writing in English, they're writing in French, they're writing in Spanish. And so Latin for thousands of years literally had been this international language where if you were an intellectual and you wanted to be remembered in posterity, you were writing in Latin. And this was sort of the final phase of that period. It was the last period where that was true, that you would write in Latin, and it started becoming acceptable to write in the vernacular, and Dante was one of the first examples of that. One of the other, you have in the series, you have a wide variety of different authors and genres of work. So, and what I was saying earlier about the Platonic theology series of a handful of books with which James Hankins participated in, and edited. That's part of this tradition within this Neo-Latin Renaissance literature of things that you can trace back some of the New Age stuff that's happening today and has been happening over the last 40, 50 years since the 60s, and it goes even earlier. It's basically continuous, but you can trace, if you trace back some of that stuff, stuff that's popular in personal development today, the intellectual history of that, a lot of it goes back to some of this stuff. And so some of these books have become popular because they were starting points for some new age sects that are active today or were particularly popular decades ago and kind of evolved into what we see today. You start to see literature that is going more in an atheist direction or doubting Christianity. You have authors, some of them are trying to synthesize the Greek and Latin texts of antiquity with Christianity. Some of them are trying to synthesize, some of them are sort of nominally Christian, but they're really reviving more of an atheistic or more of a ancient non-Christian perspective, weaving it into stories, putting it in other people's mouths, stuff like that. And then you have a wide variety of other things. So they really tried to give a sampling of a lot of different genres, and you can check those out. There's one in particular that's pretty interesting. It's it's volume 5. It's the Humanist Educational Treatises, and it gets into different theories of how education should work. And one of the and so there's still a lot of Christian influence into it, but it also starts getting into, hey, how can we revive the methods of education that go back to classical ancient times? How can we take the best of what was of teaching methods from back then and kind of bring them into the present? So there were people developing new pedagogical theories and writing them down and transmitting them. And the humanities, the way we talk about the humanities today, it kind of agglomerates in the Renaissance period, and it's really reviving a period of 1,000 years and more previously, 1,000 to 2,000 years further back. So part of what you have there also is a shifting in values among some of these authors, where they're going from the sort of classical Christian values that are more about self-abnegation and piety and really valuing religious observance, to more of a kind of almost going backwards, more of a classical set of values that revolves around glory and ambition and worldly success. And you see some of that continuing in our day as well. Sort of a shifting of ethical ideals. And what this has its roots in is humanism, and understanding humanism as a reaction to Christianity and to a believing in a higher power. So as opposed to taking ethics and values from a higher power, instead you're looking at basically, it's almost the birth of self-improvement in a sense. Self-improvement or personal development in the sense of there not being anything higher than that. So it's a sort of internalizing that self-love, almost self-deification in a sense, and refocusing away from the divine and focusing that on the self, on the human, and trying to figure out, without God, how do you maximize fulfillment, which is a word that's more modern, but how do you maximize your experience of life without that higher power, without that transcendent realm? So and it's also going back to ancient times and looking at what they valued and how they did things. And so it's not so much something that's new as much as this tension that had been going back and forth in terms of different values. So part of what's cool about getting easy access to these works, is that you can kind of rewind the clock and get a feel for what was going on at that time. And so, Machiavelli is not part of this, and but he's another example of that kind of paradigm shift in thinking about things more from a leadership and political perspective. But that's part of going back to James Hankins. That's part of what's really interesting about his book, Virtue Politics. And so he's a world-renowned scholar of the Renaissance and Renaissance philosophy and political thought in particular. And so If you're studying intellectual history, which is something I'm particularly interested in, and you're trying to understand how did all of these things happen, what are all the different threads that were going throughout, and the old saying is of history is written by the victors. Part of the bias that intellectual history and just history in general tries to correct for is understanding that there's always, or almost always, multiple philosophies or theories or religions or schools of thought in competition at any one time. And when a certain one of those schools of thought becomes dominant or becomes hegemonic, they tend to write the other ones out of history. And so you have to study intellectual history to get sort of a cross section at each period of time when they're waxing or waning, and get a sense of what was really going on, and be able to trace the threads as they get thicker and thinner throughout history, to see where things started and how they developed over time, and the sort of bias or slant that shows up in any particular time as one school of thought or another is dominant or nearly hegemonic, at least within a certain part of the world. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about this. There's your usual, I don't know if I went through every single part of the book. You have the sort of little summary on the dust jacket. I'll take the dust jacket off so you can see what it looks like underneath. It's got a really nice blue. So, yeah, you've got that. We'll look at the table of contents. I'll just take you through each page. So there's James Hankins, general editor. You have your standard introduction that gives you some context into things, some background. And there's actually some other books in this series. There's also, they put together basically a prospectus of something like 200 different titles that they were thinking about adding to this series. And most of them haven't been published, some or even really started on the translating piece of things. But you may be able to find that list, and that can give you, if you want sort of an overview of what are the most important titles of this period, that's definitely worth checking out. These encyclopedic works are almost, I mean, they're basically like the Wikipedia of their day. And he or somebody close to somebody else had written a famous men book, and so this was sort of a counterpart to that. And there's also a more recent book that I think just came out in 2023 that's on learned men. So that's another, there's some other ones that are kind of in this vein that you can check out in the series as well. Yeah. Paolo Giovio, 2023 Portraits of Learned Men. So I'll leave it there and just remind you that there's a playlist down below if you want to check out other items in this series. I also teach courses if you want to go deeper on these subjects. I have one course that's forthcoming that's on how to learn different languages simultaneously. It's part of a challenge I'm currently doing to learn 12 different languages, half of them classical, sort of older ones, and then half of them modern languages at the same time, so that I can more easily, just in my everyday reading, access things in different scripts and different languages. And I just found myself bumping up more and more into situations where I had to read a little bit of Latin or a little bit of German or French or Greek, and I just didn't feel comfortable doing it. And there was a hump I needed to get over with each of these languages. And then even with like Hebrew, Chinese, and Arabic, where there's that initial hump to just get over the symbols. So, and as I said in the Dumbarton Oaks video, they're actually planning on eventually doing Arabic and Hebrew as sub-series within this. So I have a course on that. You can email me at support@timothykenny.com if you want more information on that. Definitely get on my newsletter at timothykenny.com on the homepage, and you'll get all the announcements of my various courses. I've sort of have two parts of my career. The earlier part where I publish more, my initial 50, 60, 70, 80 courses on accelerated learning, productivity topics, thinking skills. I have that as part of a membership site. It's also on other platforms. And then the last several years, I've been doing premium courses at $1,000 and above exclusively on my own website. And if you want the details on that, if you want to talk to somebody or just get more information, email support@timothykenny.com, and we can tell you about all the latest stuff that's available at the time you're watching this video. I also have a course on basically how to approach this kind of knowledge and build a true Renaissance man level of breadth of knowledge in the important 8 different pillars of knowledge, and how to do it efficiently. So if it's not this is not something you can spend 8 hours a day doing, but it's something you want to do in your spare time, and you want to get that initial breadth and then understand how to go deeper and how to do that in an efficient way where, what often happens when you're learning the classics is somebody chooses a handful of books and you read those books very in depth, but you've got this Swiss cheese type of knowledge where you've gone very deep in a very small number of things, and then there's a huge amount you just know absolutely nothing about. And so that's what you tend to get in academia. And I've created something that's sort of the opposite of that, where it's very broad and very even, and it allows you to get a survey of what's out there, what's most important, and a whole framework for thinking about, once you do that, how to go a level deeper, a level deeper, a level deeper, almost like an archaeologist, and decide where, if you want to have a certain specialty or two, or where you want to go deeper, how to do that, and think about that within the context of having a limited amount of time, having a bunch of other things going on in your life, and wanting to do it efficiently and in a relatively standardized way, so it's not, your knowledge isn't very uneven and very random. It gives you all of that initial structure that you need to do this in a self-directed way, and gives you some really incredible resources that would be very difficult or impossible to find on your own, and took me a huge amount of time to create this course, which is just very different from everything else that's out there. So if that's something that's interesting to you, email me at support@timothykenny.com. There's also going to be a link in the description if you want to get more information on that course. And I've got other stuff coming out all the time, so make sure you're on my newsletter. If you want to get more videos like this and learn about my other accelerated learning, productivity related stuff, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you have notifications on, and check out my back catalog on this channel, because one of the things I specialize and I kind of look for is, and by the way, there's a really cool table here that I covered in more depth in the Dumbarton Oaks video. So you may want to check that out. But yeah, one of the things I look to do on my channel and just in general is I look at, like, nobody's really gone through all these different book series and reviewed and compared them all. I'm the first person really out there, period, who's done that. And especially on YouTube, putting it all on video and bringing it to a larger audience. So there's a lot of stuff on my YouTube channel that you're just not going to find anywhere else. And so I encourage you to check that out and go to the playlist page on my channel, and you'll find different playlists where I've reviewed different things and have videos on a variety of subjects. One thing that's kind of unusual about me is that I just teach in a lot of different subject areas. And so if you just look at my videos page, it can seem kind of random, but there is a larger structure to it. And so it's important for you to check out the playlists and check out my website. I have a course actually that's just a free tour of all my different courses, all the different subject areas, so that you can get a full sense of all the different things if you want to go deeper into these areas. And as always, if you're just kind of overwhelmed by it all, just email support@timothykenny.com and I or somebody else will get back to you, and we can help you sort things out and find what you're looking for and what we can help you with. So I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think down below if you have any comments or questions, other things you want me to review or talk about on the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.